Mao's China, 1949 to 1964, 1949, the founding of a new China. On October 1st, 1949, from Peking's Tiananmen Square, Communist leader Mao Zedong declared the birth of the People's Republic of China. For Mao and the Communist Party, victory in the Civil War marked the fulfillment of decades of struggle. For the people of China, it was the beginning of a new age. The new state called itself a People's Democratic Dictatorship. In reality, democracy was absent. Power flowed downward through layers of the party, from the Central Committee of roughly 100 senior members to the Politburo of 12, and finally to the Politburo Standing Committee, where true authority lay. Here sat Mao's most trusted comrades: Liu Shaoqi, veteran organizer and vice chairman; Zhou Enlai, skilled diplomat and now foreign minister; and Mao himself, at 55, the undisputed paramount leader. Mao combined charisma with ruthless determination. Though not a great speaker, he was admired for his writings, strategies, and his role in defeating both the Japanese and Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists. Beside him stood his fourth wife, Jiang Qing, once a celebrated actress. Fiercely loyal to Mao and contemptuous of his rivals, she would later play a critical role in shaping Chinese politics. But in 1949, victory brought enormous challenges. China was vast, poor, and overwhelmingly agrarian. After years of invasion and civil war, the country was shattered, its people hungry and its economy in ruins. The task of rebuilding was immense. Early reforms and Soviet support. The communists turned immediately to reform. Inspired by the Soviet model, they invited 10,000 Soviet advisors to China. Moscow offered expertise in planning, industry, and administration, and became the model for China's new socialist order. At the heart of reform was the peasantry, the base of communist support. For centuries, Chinese villages had been dominated by landlords who extracted rent from peasants. Now the regime promised land redistribution on a national scale. Landlords were branded exploiters. Millions were publicly denounced, humiliated, or executed. Their land was seized and redistributed to the poor. By 1952, more than 300 million peasants received land for the first time, transforming rural society. The new government also sought to change daily life. Laws promoted gender equality, giving women rights in marriage and work. Campaigns attacked illiteracy, which stood at 80%. To simplify learning, a new set of simplified Chinese characters was introduced. Propaganda filled theaters, schools, and village squares, teaching revolutionary values while demanding loyalty. But the new state also targeted its enemies. Suspected counter-revolutionaries, former nationalists, capitalists, or critics, were imprisoned, executed, or stripped of property. Hundreds of thousands lost homes and livelihoods. China in the Cold War abroad, Mao sought allies. But the Western powers refused recognition, continuing to back Chiang Kai-shek, who had retreated to Taiwan. For them, the Republic of China, not the People's Republic, remained legitimate. Thus, Mao turned to the Soviet Union. In late 1949, he traveled to Moscow for tense talks with Joseph Stalin. The relationship was uneasy. Mao had often resisted Soviet influence during the revolution. But in February 1950, the two sides signed a treaty of friendship, alliance, and mutual assistance. The treaty unlocked Soviet loans, technology, and military cooperation. Meanwhile, the new regime moved to secure China's frontiers. In 1949, the PLA entered Xinjiang, restoring Beijing's rule. In 1951, Tibet was annexed after a brief conflict, the party describing it as the peaceful liberation of Tibet. The Dalai Lama remained as figurehead, but authority lay with the Communist Party. Outer Mongolia, however, remained under Soviet control. Only Taiwan remained outside Mao's grasp. Both sides denounced each other as illegitimate, setting the stage for decades of hostility. 1950 to 1953, the Korean War events in Korea soon drew China into war. After World War II, Korea was divided, a communist north backed by Moscow and a democratic south supported by the US. In June 1950, North Korean forces invaded the south, quickly capturing Seoul. UN troops under American command counterattacked, pushing deep into the north, close to China's border at the Yalu River. Fearing invasion and determined to support a communist ally, Mao ordered the PLA to intervene. More than 1 million Chinese soldiers crossed into Korea, eventually rising to 2.5 million. Chinese forces pushed UN troops south in brutal fighting. The war settled into a stalemate along the 38th parallel. In 1953, an armistice created the Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, that still divides Korea today. For China, the war was a political triumph. Mao had defied the US and defended socialism abroad, but the cost was staggering. An estimated 500,000 Chinese dead, including Mao's eldest son. The US retaliated with a total trade embargo and firm support for Taiwan. 1953 to 1957, the first 5-year plan. At home, Mao pressed ahead with economic modernization. In 1953, China launched its first 5-year plan, heavily guided by Soviet expertise. Industrial output soared. Coal, steel, and oil production smashed targets. Railways expanded, factories rose, and for the first time, China became a major oil producer. In agriculture, peasants were encouraged and pressured to join cooperatives, pooling land, tools, and labor. By 1956, 80% of households were collectivized. The reforms increased state control but disrupted traditional farming. Still, the apparent successes emboldened Mao to attempt an even greater leap. 1956 to 1957, 100 Flowers and Anti-Rightist Campaign. Mao encouraged debate with his famous call, "Let 100 flowers bloom, let 100 schools of thought contend." Intellectuals, scientists, and writers responded, criticizing corruption, bureaucracy, and authoritarianism. But when criticism grew harsher than expected, Mao panicked. The party launched the Anti-Rightist Campaign, branding 500,000 critics as enemies. They were imprisoned, sent to labor camps, or executed. Rising to prominence in this purge was Deng Xiaoping, a veteran revolutionary who would later shape China's future. 1958 to 1961, the Great Leap Forward. In 1958, Mao unveiled the Great Leap Forward, designed to transform China into a socialist powerhouse. Villages were merged into giant communes, controlling every aspect of life. Kitchens were banned as selfish. People ate in communal canteens. The state set impossible targets. Farmers were ordered to smelt metal in backyard furnaces, producing mostly useless scrap. Local officials exaggerated harvests, causing the state to seize grain that did not exist. In reality, harvests were collapsing due to mismanagement, drought, and corruption. The result was catastrophic. From 1959 to 1961, famine swept the countryside. At least 30 to 45 million people starved, making it one of history's greatest man-made disasters. Entire communes perished. When Defense Minister Peng Dehuai denounced the policy at the 1959 Lushan Conference, Mao had him removed and replaced by loyalist Lin Biao. Yet by 1961, reality forced retreat. Communes were reduced, private farming partially restored, and Mao stepped back from daily governance. Liu Shaoqi, Zhou Enlai, and Deng Xiaoping steered recovery with more pragmatic policies. Social and cultural shifts. Despite turmoil, reforms continued. In 1958, a new phonetic alphabet, Pinyin, was introduced to promote literacy and standardize Chinese names internationally. Peking became Beijing, Canton became Guangzhou, Nanking became Nanjing, but Mao remained restless. In 1958, China shelled nationalist-held islands in the Taiwan Strait, triggering a nuclear standoff with the US. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, pursuing détente with the West, condemned Mao's recklessness. Mao, in turn, denounced Khrushchev as a betrayer of communism. 1959 to 1964, the Sino-Soviet split and nuclear power. In 1959, revolt erupted in Tibet. The PLA crushed the uprising, thousands died. The Dalai Lama fled to India with 80,000 followers. In 1962, war broke out with India over disputed Himalayan borders. The Soviets sided with India, deepening the split. By now, Moscow had withdrawn all aid, leaving China isolated. But China pressed forward. In 1958, it founded the University of Science and Technology of China. In 1964, at Lop Nur, China tested its first atomic bomb, followed by a hydrogen bomb in 1966. China had become the world's fifth nuclear power, a clear signal that it stood as an independent giant. By the mid-1960s, Mao remained chairman, but real power was contested. The Communist Party had transformed China in ways both profound and devastating, raising it to the ranks of global powers, but at unimaginable human cost. Mao, never content to step aside, was preparing for yet another revolution, this time against his own party.